Big story of the day, of course, all across the newspapers, all over the news. Over the weekend, calls for the Prime Minister's chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, to resign after it was reported that he travelled over 260 miles during the lockdown in March to stay with his family in Durham. OK, well, you saw it yesterday. The Prime Minister came out, he stood by what is his senior aide, and he said he acted responsibly, he acted legally, he acted with integrity. A lot of you not too sure about that, and here is what Boris Johnson had to say at the news conference yesterday.
I can tell you today I've had extensive face-to-face conversations with Dominic Cummings, and I've concluded that in travelling to find the right kind of childcare at the moment when both he and his wife were about to be incapacitated by coronavirus, and when he had no alternative, I think he followed the instincts of every father and every parent, and I do not mark him down for that. And though there have been many other allegations about what happened when he was in self-isolation and thereafter, some of them palpably false, I believe that in every respect he has acted responsibly and legally and with integrity, and with the overwhelming aim of stopping the spread of the virus and saving lives.
OK, now we're going to get the views now from newspaper journalists, the associate editor of The Telegraph, Camilla, Tominey, the journalist Andrew Pearce there as well. Guys, good morning, very good to see you.
Morning.
Morning. Both your papers have a lot to say about this today. Andrew, I want to go to you about your paper first of all, and the headline screams, "What planet are they on?" And the comment, and I just want to ask you if you are at one with your newspaper on this, but the Mail is saying today, the Mail, who's normally a Conservative supporting newspaper, in the clearest way, Dominic Cummings has violated the spirit and letter of the lockdown. In doing so, he's given every selfish person a licence to play fast and loose with public health. Do you agree with your newspaper's stance?
Yeah, look, we've all got sympathy for a dad, a parent who tries to do the right thing, Eamonn. But this politics is about perception. This looks like this lockdown rule is for us little people, and the politicians who decide the lockdown rules, it doesn't apply to them. I had the coronavirus, OK, right at the beginning of this pandemic, and the rules were quite clear. If you've got it, if you've got symptoms, you stay at home. You do not drive your wife 250 miles across the country with a 4-year-old in the back seat to stay. It's just not the interpretation.
Except if you have children. Well, yes, they had said. We're looking at the official guidelines of the time. And they actually say, I'll quote them here, this is from the Chief Medical Officer for England, if you have children, keep following this advice to the best of your ability. However, we are aware that not all these measures will be possible. And the Dr. Jenny Harries, Chief Medical Officer, says, clearly, if you have adults who are unable to look after a small child, that is an exceptional circumstances, and that's what he would have claimed.
Yeah, look, Dominic Cummings tells us, contrary to what the Prime Minister said in that briefing yesterday, the Prime Minister said that symptoms of COVID were imminent. Apparently his wife already had it. Why didn't Dominic Cummings stay at home and look after his child? They've got friends in London, they've got family in London. The trouble is, it just suggests to people that they don't have to take this lockdown very seriously. We had the Chief Medical Officer in Scotland, she breached the rules, she was fired. The scientific advisor who came up with this, the guy from Imperial College, he breached the rules, he resigned. But not Dominic Cummings, who most people watching this program think, who is he? Well, he is the Prime Minister's most important advisor. He's spent an awful lot of money, and it will look to most people. You just got to look at the letters we had on the Daily Mail yesterday. We were saying, my father died. I couldn't go and see him in a care home. People could not go into hospital and see people who are dying from this virus. But Dominic Cummings could drive with his wife and child. She had the virus, 250 miles to a different part of the country, and they've still not answered properly yet whether he stayed locked down when he was in Durham. The Prime Minister was asked that repeatedly in that briefing yesterday. He didn't answer the question. He has to tell us.
Camilla, let's bring you in there. Why is the Prime Minister Boris Johnson standing by him? Why hasn't he asked him to resign?
Well, that's a good question, Ruth, and no doubt your viewers are thinking the very same thing. But the truth is, Boris Johnson, I don't think, has ever fired anyone in his political career. There may have been one aide back when he was first Mayor of London, but he hates getting rid of people. He doesn't like making these sorts of difficult decisions. At the end of the day, he is the antithesis of Dominic Cummings. Dominic Cummings is a man who doesn't care what people think of him. We saw him say that on Saturday when he was surrounded by press outside his house. The Prime Minister is the complete opposite. He does care. He likes to be liked. He's a pleaser. So there's an emotional bond with Cummings, and that's been borne out of the fact that he credits Cummings, obviously, with the EU referendum result, with getting Brexit done, with getting him his 80-seat majority and winning that election with him. So there's an emotional bond there, but there's also a practical bond. At the end of the day, Dominic Cummings is his enforcer. He's the one who does the dirty work at Downing.
I understand that, Camilla. He's the attack dog, but what you're describing, the way you're describing Boris Johnson, are you telling us that is a strength with him, or is that a weakness with him?
Well, that's what people have to decide, right? On one hand, we elected this man as Prime Minister because of his likeability, because of the fact that he seemed quite vulnerable and human, and because of his bravado. But we're now in a national crisis. So that ability of his previously to kind of crack a joke and make everyone feel better doesn't really fit in with the current situation. And what we also have is somebody who is a showman, but not necessarily a details man. So actually somebody like Cummings, who is across the detail and everything comes across his desk, if he goes, there's a massive void to fill in the middle of a national emergency. It should also be pointed out that Boris Johnson did nearly die of this and was compromised during this crisis from a health perspective. So he was even more reliant on Cummings. The entire Downing Street team is formed around Cummings. Andrew will agree with this. So whether that's right or wrong at the moment, the decision has been made clearly on an emotional and practical level that the Prime Minister cannot do.
Let me ask the both of you then. OK, you're PM, he's your advisor. And I'll ask you, Camilla, first and then Andrew. Does he stay or go? Would you, I mean, practically, you made a very good argument there. I understand the pros and cons of what you said there. If it was you, would you fire him or would you keep him?
You have to, because if an advisor becomes the story and detracts from what you're trying to achieve and ruins your reputation, then they have to go ultimately. That's the bold step.
Andrew?
I'm afraid he has to go. I've known Dominic Cummings over 20 years. The lockdown, people are already contemptuous of this lockdown. People are breaking the lockdown all over the country. They're going to see this and think, if the Prime Minister's right-hand man can break it, why can't I? And this is the most important public health crisis in this country since the Second World War. He has to go, I'm afraid.
Do you think he will?
No. Because the Prime Minister's going to brace, as the Mail headline says today, the Prime Minister's going to brace out. This is going to do a lot of damage to Boris Johnson's popularity, his reputation, because, as Camilla said, he is a very popular man. He likes to be liked. This is going to damage him a lot, but they've calculated that. They've worked this out in Number 10, and they think it's worth the hit because he is so important to the Downing Street mix. Dominic Cummings is Boris Johnson's right-hand man, and I think he struggles to be Prime Minister without him.
Well, what about in terms of popularity, though, Andrew? I mean, obviously, you can't be someone like Cummings without having enemies, and I think that's, this action aside, this has given a lot of people a lot of opportunity to come out and say, right, we've got you now.
They're crawling out of the woodwork to attack him because the thing is, as Camilla said, Dominic Cummings doesn't care what people think. He's contemptuous of most politicians. He's never been a member of the Conservative Party, ever. He's contemptuous of civil servants with some good reason, because civil servants, in my view, have screwed up a lot of the country for decades. So he's made enemies all over the place, and they're coming out of the woodwork to get him. But while the Prime Minister's with him, he's not going to go anywhere. But he should.
What about the public's perception now, Camilla, of Boris Johnson? What do you think the effect will be on that?
Well, previously, we'd seen stories associated with Cummings, and he seemed like he was a bit of a sponge, absorbing some of the criticism on Boris Johnson's behalf. But unfortunately now, both of them are saturated with this problem, right? By association, Johnson is damned by Cummings's behaviour. So when your problem solver in chief becomes the problem, what's the solution? And people will have been looking at the press conference yesterday, wanting decisive action, wanting Johnson to understand what the perception is, that actually these are rules that are made by people to be broken while other people are running around and following them. Doesn't make sense, doesn't patch up. So I think it's doing untold damage to Boris Johnson as an individual and of the government. That's why Tory MPs are up in arms. It's all very well saying, well, they've never liked Cummings in the first place. But this whole thing is reflecting badly on the entire administration.
Has it affected you, Camilla, as a mum as a parent, as someone who's, you know, trying to keep your family safe, and maybe you might think there's room for manoeuvre here. Does it affect how you interpret the guidelines, or are the guidelines now a shambles and a mess?
Well, I think it's very problematic to say that when we have said to the public, follow the rules, and we're now following our instincts, I think it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle. I'm not advocating anyone breaking any lockdown rules, but there were plenty of people, and the police told us, we reported it in the Telegraph this morning, plenty of people were turning around to the police yesterday saying, why should I follow the rules? This bloke isn't. That's really damaging public perception around this issue.
Do you think, Andrew, people will be breaking lockdown because of it today?
I think they'll use it as an excuse, Ruth, and that's very sad, because the lockdown, we're told, is for the good of our public health. But I have to say again, this is the third high-profile figure associated with the government who's ignored, in my view, the rules. And people will just think, to hell, if the sun is shining today, they're going to go out and think, well, what do I care? If the Prime Minister's right-hand man uses his instincts, that's what they're saying about this, uses instincts, why can't I use my instinct, which is these rules are stupid anyway.
But you're saying, Andrew, we can debate this till we're blue in the face, but your instinct, your political instinct on this is, he ain't going, nothing's going to change.
Because they go back such a long way, Boris Johnson owes Dominic Cummings an awful lot. He's also incredibly close to Michael Gove, the Cabinet Office Minister. There would have been no referendum victory without Dominic Cummings. There would have been no general election victory on the scale we saw without Dominic Cummings. He is the Prime Minister's right-hand man. He's the Prime Minister's right arm, left arm. He does it. He can't do it without him, really. And I think it would be such a grievous blow to the Downing Street administration. He's going to fight on. Also, there's one other thing, Eamonn. The Prime Minister, this is the first big test between the Prime Minister and the mob baying for resignation. He's determined not to throw somebody to the wolves as he sees it. That's what somebody said to me yesterday. You lot in the press are not having a scalp. Well, not yet.
Well,
Andrew, appreciate your
Thank
take
you.
on things. Camilla, thanks very much for your time
Thank you
again
both.
this morning. Really appreciate that, guys.